Welcome to In the Seams, a podcast by Broken and Mended. And now your host, David Heflin.
Welcome back to In the Seams. Today I got to talk to Dan Finch, and we had a great interview that I hope that you will stick around and listen to, of someone who was already in their mid-40s, seemingly doing well, and all of a sudden had a condition called pulmonary fibrosis, which was life-threatening, expected to end his life without a lung transplant. And as he did get that lung transplant, and then years later also came down with a liver disease that was non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver, also deadly, also in need of a transplant. He's still in the middle of that fight. In between that, he had a grandson that had chemo, he had leukemia, so had to go through chemo, but he had leukemia. And fortunately, his grandson, Marcel, has just recently been declared cancer-free. But what I found most interesting in the interview was Dan, where a lot of people, maybe when all this bad stuff is happening to them, could have asked why God, and it's not a bad question to ask. I think we all are there. But instead of asking that question and fleeing from God, he really leaned into his faith in God and his hope in God, and saw his faith and dependence on him increase with the support also of his wife of 24 years. And so a lot of good stuff in this interview. He's written a book, and I don't have the title of that in front of me, but it will be in the episode as well as in the show links. I know it has to do with growing your faith as you're kind of walking through the fire, but I didn't have the exact title sitting in front of me as I record the intro, but you will hear the name of the book as well as find a link to it in the interview in the show notes. And so I just wanted to tell you about one other thing before I turn you back over to the interview, is that our second annual Broken and Mended virtual conference will be on October the 10th. And there is now a link in the show notes where you can go to directly register for that. As an added incentive, the first 50 people that register will be eligible to win the prize of getting a signed copy of my brand new book called Purpose in Pain, Rediscovering God's Purpose Through the Pain of Chronic Illness. And so I'll draw a name out of that first 50, and that whoever that is will get that free signed book. And so again, this is free. If you're unable to attend live, you can still register, and you will get the links later, but you do have to register to get the links, whether you're watching live or watching later. Eventually, we may put them for everyone on YouTube, but at least in the first few months, it will be exclusive to people who register for our event. So follow the link to that, be a part of that. As I mentioned, I have a new book out. I'll put the link to that as well. It's been out now for a couple months, but still feel like we're just getting the word out there about it, and I hope that you will consider reading that as part of your journey with chronic illness, a companion on your journey, so to speak, for that. So thank you always for listening to In the Seams and being with us. I would only ask that we consider rating and liking our show, whatever particular platform you're getting it from, just so it will help other people be able to find us out there. All right. God bless and enjoy the interview. Well, I want to welcome you back to In the Seams, and I'm excited to have our guest with us today, Dan Finch. And Dan has come to us. He has written a book called Building Faith While Walking Through Fire, and we're going to be getting into that and getting into his story, what led to him writing that book. And I think it will be a source of encouragement and hope for all of you who are listening. So, Dan, first of all, I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and
well,
let's go.
Yeah. Well, we're really glad you are, and we're glad you're willing to share your story. It is not one that has been easy, and I know you're still right in the middle of it. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what your life was like before the lung problem started, And when did you first realize that, okay, this wasn't some minor respiratory thing, that something was seriously wrong?
Well, I drove a truck for like 3 decades, and most of it over the road, some of it local. But one day I was down in South Carolina, and I was rolling up my gear to hook up my trailer, and I just like lost my breath. And when I climbed it back into the truck, I had to sit there for like 15 or 20 minutes just to,
Oh, wow.
recoup my breath. And now, I'm hundreds and hundreds of miles away from home, so
Hmm.
I sucked it up. I drove, made my delivery, went home. And, Rose had seen it for a while, and she said, "Look, we got to go to the doctor." So I'm not a big doctor. Well, I was never really a big doctor person because I always was gone away and, hated coming off the road because I'd rather be out there supporting my family than sitting in a doctor's office.
Sure.
But we went to the doctor. He told me, I had a pneumonia, and then he sent me for some other kind of scan. I forget what it was back then. And then he told me that I needed to go to the hospital and talk to a pulmonologist. I'm like, okay. I didn't know nothing about it, and
Right.
then all of a sudden, at 46 years old, this doctor's telling me I got to put you on oxygen and you can no longer drive a truck, and your life is going to stop today. So
Wow.
and it kind of hits you, and at first I was embarrassed. I was like, my God, I'm 46 years old and I got to walk around with an oxygen tank. And I've been healthy my whole life. I played sports all my life when I was younger, and it really, really hit me hard when they told me I was sick, and then went through a battery of tests and talked to a my pulmonologist that, got me to get on the transplant list. And I'll never forget because it was January 2nd, 2018. Because we had stayed down in New Jersey for New Year's because it was a closer drive to the hospital in Philly from my friend's house than it is from my house. And then on that date, I asked my doctor straight out, I said, "Look, without a transplant, what am I looking at?" And he looked dead in my face and said, 12, maybe 18 months. And I said, wow. And that's when it hits you, and you got to go home. And, at the time, my daughter was 12. My other daughter was 21 maybe, something like that. And my son was 20, like a year younger than her.
Okay.
And it broke me having to tell my family and just look at my children and tell them that, without a transplant, that within a year their father might not be here no more. And
Yeah. Well, I could imagine. It's got to be unreal how quickly all that hits you, and so there wasn't any time to digest it. Doesn't sound like wasn't a whole lot of chance to kind of build up to this. It just all of a sudden your whole life has changed. I did want to clarify. So you mentioned Rose, and is that your wife's name? Is that right?
yes.
Okay. Um, and so you were 46 when this started.
Yep.
And that was in 2017, it sounds like. And then at the beginning of 2018 is when you got put on the transplant list. Do I have that right?
That's when he told me that I had 12
Oh,
to
somebody
18
told you
months.
about how long you would have.
Yeah, getting on, you know, it takes a lot to get on the list, and that's why I joined a couple Facebook groups for people trying to get transplants to try to explain to them,
Uh-huh.
it's not just going to a doctor and getting on a list. You got to work to get on that list. You got to prove that when you go into surgery that you can make it out of surgery. So you got to make yourself as tough as it is to make yourself healthier. You got to try to be as healthy as you can going into something like that, because if not, the recovery is unbearable. Like,
Yeah, I got you. So, could tell us again, and you might have said, but just what was your official diagnosis?
um, it was pulmonary fibrosis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now this is, yeah. Go ahead.
no, it started out. They first called it interstitial lung disease, which
Mm-hmm.
basically means we have no idea why your lung is not working, pretty much. You know, and then they, I guess the more scans and stuff they did and testing they did, they, classified it as pulmonary fibrosis.
So I will say that when I was kind of reviewing your story before we had this conversation, maybe the part that surprised me was that this was something that could develop, so late. Because when I hear the word fibrosis, of course, I think often of cystic
Cystic
fibrosis, which is
fibrosis.
something that most people are kind of diagnosed with early on and often don't live a very long life because of it. And so, what causes pulmonary fibrosis? Do they have any idea what kind of starts all that?
No, and then and I asked them, after the transplant, if they were going to be able to figure out why this happened, and the only thing they were ever able to tell me was that it was an occupational disease. I was like, okay, well, but I've delivered everything, so there's nothing.
Hmm.
I've driven tanker, I've driven, delivered fuel, I've worked up on gas rigs. I mean, my driving experience is so various and vast. It's hard to pinpoint anything that would have caused it. You know, so they
Yeah.
never
Well,
told me.
that's I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just said, so they never really gave me a reason why it happened to me.
Sure. Well, you know what? Sometimes I know a lot of our listeners have had a similar experience where we don't always understand why something takes place in our life, and it certainly can catch us by surprise. And certainly, in this case, it did for you. So in 2018, early 2018, you're told that you may have 12 to 18 months to live without a transplant. And along sometime after this, you received word that your grandson had leukemia. How long was that after you were
Uh,
told this in January of 2018?
2 months,
Two
actually, like
months.
like two
So,
months and 4 days or 5 days, something like that. Yep. So my family had
so
no,
as a
yeah, they didn't have no time to react to my news, and then we got more devastating news. So
yeah, I don't have any grandchildren yet. I have three kids, and I just know that anytime there's a problem with one of them, it always upsets me more than even the things that I'm going through. Um, and so you get into this, you get this awful news.
mhm,
And how old was your grandson when you got it?
2.5 at the time.
Two and a half.
Yeah.
And you state in your book in chapter 5, so I'm quoting you here from your book, we got in the car and we prayed the entire way out loud because we knew what that word meant. And and you continued, I prayed in a way I never had before. I asked God to take it from him and give it to me, which is like I said, the way us parents would feel and grandparents. So it sounds like obviously a groundbreaking and heartbreaking moment. I wondered if you could expand a little bit on that and share with us what was going through your mind at this moment.
Yeah. Well, the time with Marcel was, he'd always been a happy baby, playful, always laughing. And then for a few days, he was down. He was real down, no activity, but no fever, no nothing like that. So our daughter said she was going to take him to the doctor. So we were like, okay, call us and let us know what's going on. And not, an hour later, she said, meet us at the hospital because they told us we have to go to the hospital. And I was like,
Wow.
Okay. They were thinking it was, I forget what it is. It's some kind of platelet disorder or something like that. But when we got to the hospital, met them at the hospital, now I'm on oxygen. The emergency room is jam-packed with people. So right away, I'm nervous because I don't want to get sick at all. I got a mask on. I got 50 people in a 30-person waiting room. But they pulled my grandson in pretty quick. And, I got real nervous. I went outside for a few. And they were doing testing and stuff. I said, all right, you know what? I said, let's go back home. I talking to Rose. I said, let's go back home and we'll wait there. It was probably about a 30-minute ride. So we no sooner walked in the door, got to sit down, and the phone rang again. And it was our daughter crying, saying Marcel has leukemia. So, and, so that would have been 2018, which would have been about 14 years since my father had passed from leukemia. So that's why it was so familiar to myself, my wife, my daughter, because we all lived through it. And the thing that scared us the most was when my father found out he had leukemia, he found out in like mid-June, early July, and was gone by December. So it terrified us to think we were going to lose our grandson. So the whole way we prayed, and I would say every night for, I don't even know how long, I prayed that Jesus would take whatever Marcel had and just put it on me, because when I had lived my life, I raised my children, and if they had if there was a way to sacrifice me for him, I'd still do it today. I'd do it for any of my kids, any of my grandkids, and that's really, really when my faith started growing, was because, you really got nothing to lean on but each other and the Lord, and try to, bring your family close. And I pushed appointments. I did stuff that I really shouldn't have did, ignoring my own health, to make sure that, one, because Marcel was in the hospital for probably 3 weeks to a month. And don't cry, Rose. Sorry, my wife's crying because she's thinking about it.
Sure.
But it was a really rough time that we all, and my wife's always been really faithful. She's always followed Jesus and stuff. So I was brought into her world, as I, like to think, because I always believed, but I I didn't live by it like I do now. You know,
Hmm.
it's just because of the way my parents were. They weren't faithful people. My mother went to church every once in a while, and my dad never went. And I was always so busy working that when I was home on the weekend, the last thing I wanted to do was go anywhere because I hadn't been home in a week. So, and it kind of changed the way I think and the way I thought about how much Jesus does help everybody and how much guidance if you just listen to him, and feel what he's trying to instill in you, to let you, have some kind of peace while going through stuff like this. It's difficult.
Well, I find it interesting as you describe that at one point you said that was really when my faith started to grow. That not everyone, has that experience, right? When some bad news comes, a lot of times
Right.
some people react the opposite way. So I find it interesting that in your situation, it caused you to reach out more to the Lord. And is that just because you just knew
When
how
I
much
first
you?
got sick, there was a lot of why me. You know,
Sure,
I,
sure.
I was mad at the world. I was like, you got to be kidding me. You know, granted, I don't see my wife from Sunday to Thursday every week, but you know what? We live good. We have no problems. We have no issues. Financially, we're okay. And then the flip of a switch, everything changes.
Hmm. Um, yeah, just one second here. I was going to talk just a little bit more as you reflect on your spiritual walk with all this. First of all, before I go any further into that, though, I just want to ask what the outcome has been for Marcel. I think our
Actually,
listeners are going to want to know that.
we this year, what was it, like 2 months ago, his doctors officially call him cancer free.
Okay, that's
So
awesome.
it's been what, like 7 years now, 8 years almost, because he's 10, he's going to be 11, and so yeah, almost 9 years since he's been sick. But I mean, he's a great little kid now. I'm just so thankful that he's still here.
Yeah, amen, amen. And I think he could be someone that at his age has already gone through more than what a lot of people multiple times his age has gone through. And
Oh,
I believe the Lord would use that in his life.
yes. Yeah, no, that's one thing is he is, even at his young age, he loves being in church, loves being around the church, everything. So, I mean, my daughter and son-in-law and their kids, they get to service, because they only live right down the street from where our church is. And like I said, with me, it all has to depend on what the weather's like outside and whether I'm going to leave the house or not. Like today, not a chance. Right now, our heat index is like 107, 108 right now. So yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to continue along similar theme there, talking about kind of faith and what our response to these sort of circumstances are. Very dramatic, not only dramatic, but traumatic experiences that we have when we get bad news about ourselves, especially when we get bad news about a child or a grandchild. But one thing that stood out was you said this, it's kind of an insightful comment. Normal didn't come around very often anymore. And I guarantee you that a lot of our audience, people living with chronic illness, chronic pain, every day of their lives, and some of them with life-threatening diagnoses, and some of them whose quality of life or career or whatever has been impacted in significant ways. That phrase jumps off at us because normal didn't come around very often anymore. You end up trying to acclimate to some kind of new normal. And so with having to deal with that, kind of earthquake in your life as Christians, how do we handle being real with God and ourselves? In other words, we're not just putting on a face, right? We're not just pretending like,
No,
this is
no.
all okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to kind of just like, a normal week, would have been me working, coming home, maybe going out to dinner or having the kids over now, barbecue, all kinds of stuff. And now it's just a lot of that stuff has gone away because it's so difficult for me to, like get outside and do stuff. And like I would love to be able to just go and pick up my grandkids and go to a park for a few hours and run around with them and this and that. But I could take them to a park, but I got to sit down and watch them because I can't really do much. So it's hard to deal with, but you try not to let, like I try never to let my children or my grandchildren see, and I know it's probably not right, but I'm still a father, I'm still a grandfather. I'm always going to try to protect my children. My son,
sure,
he's a man, he takes things a lot better than my daughters do. I mean, he's more like me than any, because he is stubborn and, he hates the doctors and the same things that I did growing up, and, it's just one of those things where you have to believe that your faith can overcome and let you, not so much hide how you're feeling, but not express it so much, keep it internal, because the look that I seen on my children's face the day I told them, my diagnosis, and it's a look I never want to see again on my children's face.
Sure.
It's
and your inclination is to protect them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, any parent, I think every parent should protect their children. Granted, we don't always have that, but, it's got to be the main focus to raise your children, bring them up right, bring them up with a sense of morals, bring them up believing in Jesus, so that when times do get tough, and I don't care who you are, times get tough for everybody. You have somewhere and somebody to talk to, even if, you can't see him, but you can feel him. So when there's times I'll sit in the back room by myself and just have a conversation with the Lord, and sometimes I'll hear my wife, "Who are you talking to?" And it's just me thinking out loud, and it's but that's just the way we live our lives now. It's a rough situation, but what's the alternative?
Sure. Well, you touch on kind of something that we come across a lot with Broken and Mended, and particularly sometimes a struggle with men is knowing how real and honest to be, or how this impression that we have to always appear to have it together, or to be tough for the sake of others. And whereas I totally agree about, I don't want to unnecessarily hurt my children. I don't have grandchildren yet, but I do have three almost all grown children. And and when I was kind of going through my early days of chronic illness, and they were a little bit young, I think, to understand or to grasp what I was going through. Later on, I remember this very vividly. One of the diseases I have is called ankylosing spondylitis, and I think even though I had had it for years, my kids did not know what it was. So I found this it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't anything dramatic. It just was kind of explaining what ankylosing spondylitis was. It was a YouTube video. And I sat down and I thought, you know what, this will at least help them understand. So we sit down and we watch that video together. And next thing I know, all my kids are crying. And I'm thinking, well, that wasn't what I was going for. But it was maybe still a breakthrough in communication. And let me ask you this, Dan. So if your kids, and even Marcel, who would be old enough to listen to this interview, what do you think their reaction would be to the honesty that you're sharing with us today?
Probably a little shocked. I mean, my oldest daughter knows, a lot more than anybody else because, with what she went through with Marcel, we've talked tremendously about, health and faith and stuff like that. And, my youngest daughter, she just out of the house, trying to live her life, and, we'll see how that goes for a while. But, I pray for them every day. I pray for my children to, do the right things in life. But I don't know about. I don't know if they would let Marcel listen to it right now, just because they read him the chapter about him in the book, because it was about him. And I had talked to my daughter before I had even put it in the book. I asked her permission. I asked Marcel's permission.
Sure.
They were fine with it, and it was just one of those things that, he right now he's, because of the leukemia and stuff, it messed with his brain developing on time. So he's still probably a year and a half behind where he should be. Mm-hmm. Because, he got such a late start at everything because of just going through what he went through. So I think in a few years, like my children will listen to this, and, my daughters will love it. My son will listen to it and be like, okay, like I said, he is who he is, He works midnights. I talk to him once a week. He's got his kids, and
sure,
it is what it is. Girls will always stay closer.
I think what you're doing, yes, and I think what you're doing, though, getting on a podcast like this, and more importantly, writing a book that you did, will end up being a blessing. And it speaks to you courageously sharing a story that people need to hear, because others have gone through something like this and they feel alone. They don't feel like anyone understands what they're going through. And so I just think what you're doing here is important, and I just want to encourage you in that. And I did want to talk about one other aspect that comes up in the books quite a bit. And the reason why we're highlighting this aspect, me and Andres, who's our show producer, zero in on the financial strain, is because, again, a whole lot of our listening audience have been devastated by medical bills,
Right.
including the person speaking to you now. And so, talk a little bit about that and how that affects the family as a whole. And has it been helpful um, in terms of being qualified with disability? And I don't know all that, but has that led to some kind of financial aid? Kind of where are you in that struggle right now? How has that impacted your family?
Well, when I first got sick, you know, as soon as you're put on oxygen, and the doctor declares that you have to be on oxygen, like there's no dispute that the disability can have to not give it to you. So you don't have that
Right.
year, 2 year waiting for a decision. But
Mm-hmm.
the government makes you give them 5 free months. So if you don't have money saved to live on for a 5 month furlough, you're kind of stuck, and you're
Yeah.
out there asking friends, your church. Like a couple of times, our church helped us pay our rent. Um, you know, and I hate talking bad about, the way the government handles things, but it's to the point where you live a certain way for so long, and I understand things change when you get sick. I knew I would never make the money that I made on the road, but you go from I was an owner operator truck driver, so I made great money. So you go from making
Mm-hmm.
Between 120 and 150,000 a year to making a little over $20,000 a year.
Oh
And,
wow.
yeah. So, and they told me, with the limits that I got, I can't work. And my wife, even to this day, doesn't even like me going to the store by myself because I still have issues going on, both with my breathing and now I got, a new condition, but, it's kind of hard to try to manage your life, manage your bills, keep your house, you know, and your medicines, like this year alone, like my medicines for the most part used to be covered with my one insurance. And then for some odd reason, a couple years ago, I changed. And everything, like my medications, the first year was the same, didn't really cost me that much. But now, two of the main medicines I need are respectively for a 90-day supply, $567 and 676 or something like that. So
Yeah.
now I know people say, well, that's a 90-day supply. Well, yeah, when you're only bringing home a little over $2,000 a month, that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. Yeah.
When you turn around and, my house is 3 hours from my transplant hospital. And I was actually released allowed to go back to my home exactly 2 weeks to the day that I had my surgery, which is unheard of. Like I talk to people that have been in the hospital 2-3 months still, from this surgery.
You're talking about after your lung transplant surgery, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. I was
Okay.
back home in my house 2 weeks to the day of my surgery. And not once have I been re-hospitalized. And everybody, they all wonder, oh, I listened to the doctor. I was wearing a mask before it was cool to wear a mask in COVID. Everybody used to look at me like, I remember being in the grocery store and me and my wife were walking down the aisle and the lady, I was wearing a mask and she goes, "Are you sick?" And my wife, and I looked at her and I was like, "No, but you might be." My wife was like, "No, you got to understand, he just had a transplant. He can't have, anybody's germs or anything." The only place I was ever allowed to be without a mask was in my house. And they told me, really, the only people I could be around was my family, without a mask. And they said, you have to do that because you got to get used to their germs. Your body has to get used to that again. And without that, you'll always wear a mask. But it took, wow, I don't even know. Like, because I was wearing a mask before COVID started. And I guess I finished wearing a mask when COVID ended. So I mean, I was with a mask for years. So
for our listener, we're trying to track, kind of the story there.
Yep.
You got the 12 to 18 months to live thing back in January 2018. When did you get your transplant?
Here's another sign from the Lord. I actually received my transplant on my grandson Marcel's birthday that year. When he turned 3,
wow,
I got my transplant that day.
So was it a year?
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, and if not for my wife, I probably would not be here because the night, it was a Monday night, and me and my 2 friends always, they're both in Jersey, and we talk all the time during Monday Night Football. We text back and forth all night long during the game. But they kept texting after the game because they're Pittsburgh fans, and I'm not. Mm-hmm. And so they kept ragging me all night. So I shut my ringer off because I got mad. And wouldn't it be the same night that the hospital calls for my transplant? So when they called me and didn't get an answer, they called another relative, and then they called Rose. And thank God she answered because they said that was the last phone call they were making. So
wow.
Yeah, it was a blessing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know that you've had a new problem. You've already alluded to it, develop here more recently involving your liver.
Yep.
Now, is this something completely different, or is it? I mean, I know it's not in the lungs again, but I mean, is it somehow? Are they connected somehow?
They won't connect them as of right now, but I have total non-alcoholic cirrhosis of my liver. So I don't know, but God is working because a year ago, actually pretty much a year ago right now, like my stomach blew up like somebody stuck a basketball in my belly. And it was full of toxins from my liver. And I went to the other bad thing about the insurance. The one hospital I went to wouldn't tap my stomach. They wanted to send me to another hospital to get it done, but my insurance wouldn't pay for it. So I had to go home and suffer, and they put me on water pills, and which flushed all the toxins out. But while they were there, it did some damage to my transplanted lung because my breathing got worse. And, the same thing, July 16th, 2025, a doctor at Hershey Medical Center told me I had probably 2 years to live without a transplant.
Wow.
So, but like I said, I believe Jesus is working because my numbers have actually gotten better and not worse. So when I talked to my doctor, I don't know, probably a month or so ago, my numbers were lower. And she said, well, from here, I would probably give you at least another 2 years. So I've already gained 1 year. So I'm thankful for that, So,
Well, that gives us something, all of us, an opportunity to pray for you in that way. Then, if you're still in the middle of this fight, and
well,
and I'm glad that.
And the problem is, I have 3 people willing to donate a lobe of the liver. But this is the misconception a lot of people have. You still have to be listed on the UNOS list. You still have to go through all the testing because no doctor is going to sign their name on it if you're not going to make it out of surgery. Which is a shame that, doctors worry more about stats than doing everything that they can possibly to try to help somebody. But that's the world we live in.
Yeah, we see that with, like you've already alluded to, with the insurance companies, when they'll pay for this and when they want, and when you have to be sent home when you shouldn't have been, and then doctors get pressured into that situation too. We're kind of hitting the home stretch here in our conversation, so I want to make sure we talk about your book for a moment. And first of all, when did you decide to write the book, and kind of what led you to decide to write it?
Well, back when I first got sick, I used to just talk into my phone, like to leave notes and stuff for my kids. So if something, was to happen to me before I was ready or before God was ready to have me come home, I was hoping that they would all sit around a table one day and just go through my phone and look at all the stuff and all their pictures, and then find the section where, it had all these recordings of my voice talking about everything I was going through, remembering times when they were growing up and stuff like that. And then once I got sick with my liver, I realized, I might not get another miracle. And I didn't want to not have this for my family and for other people to try to take it as a guide that, things that you got to go through to get where you want to be. So that was the main thing. Plus, like I said, it's a struggle the way my wife and I live. And, we still struggle to this day, every day. At the end of each month, we are flat broke, waiting for the month to change so we can get paid, so that I can pay my bills and, put gas in the car and stuff like that. And I wanted to hopefully have this book do well enough that if I'm not around, that she'll have something to help her along the way. So
some supplemental income then, and
right.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you've written it. I know it'll make a difference in the lives of many people, including close to home in your own family. Yep. But we're excited as a podcast that we're getting to get this out to more people. And so when we share it in our different social media circles and that sort of thing, it will hopefully raise visibility of that book. And we encourage our readers to check it out. Our readers, sorry, I do write too, so I have readers. So I mean, in this case, our listeners to check it out. And I think you'll be blessed by it. I know I've been blessed by this conversation. And Dan, as we get ready to close, are there any other additional resources or insights from your journey that you want to share?
The only thing I would like to share else is when you do go through something like this, having a strong support system is absolutely necessary. And I know this because, and I know she hates when I say it to her, but, my wife and I, like if we go to the grocery store, she always tells me I say it in the same spot because I don't know why. But, when I got to be the one to push the cart because I use it for stability sometimes. And I truly believe without her, I would not be here. Because she has been, like I said, she dropped her life, dropped everything. She was a head teacher in a daycare, took care of kids her whole life. And then she went from doing that to taking care of an adult, and she's never left my side at all. And that's probably what I'm most thankful for, and what I praise Jesus the most for is for bringing her into my life.
Amen. I can understand that completely, and I know what a blessing it is because not everyone who is listening has that strong support from a spouse or others. So that's something to give praise to God for. And thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your story with us, for sharing your book with us. And we're just glad that you were able to join us.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, and I really appreciate everything.
Absolutely. And I just will say to our listeners as we get ready to close, we encourage you, if you are blessed by this conversation, to share it in your social media networks or wherever you can. Tell others about it. We appreciate it if you rate and like our show just to help us get that out a little bit more. And I will mention also that now you can actually register for our free virtual conference that is coming up on October 10th. And you can hear great speakers. We have 3 picked out, for that, who have agreed to speak: Nate Brooks, Amber Ginter, and Sarah Walton, all people who have dealt with either chronic illness and or mental health struggles or a caregiving situation in the case of Nate Brooks. And so I think we got a real good balance between our speakers this year. Our first conference last year was wonderful. And so want everyone to check that out. I'll have a link for it on our website, but I'll have a direct link here in the show notes as well. So until next time, we pray that you continue to draw close to God as He has promised to draw near to us when we draw near to Him. So God bless you, and we'll catch you next time.